nearest place to embark to acquire, say, a journeyman's knowledge of something that tended towards film was the still photograph. To try to be a still photographer in the late 50s and on into the middle 60s in New York was to live in a kind of vacuum. There was no photographic milieu, or virtually none, that I thought could be taken seriously. There was one very small gallery on East 10th Street. I don't remember what it was called. It was kind of 2 rooms painted white. It was very much a kind of coterie situation. The photographs weren't very interesting. And a guy named Norbert Kleber, who lived under the stairs in the village and had a very long front hallway that led back into his apartment, opened something called the Underground Gallery, which was his hallway. That was it. The rest was the MoMA, and the MoMA was then as it is now, except that it was Steichen instead of Sarkovsky, and it was, you know, the family of man instead of what have you, the current product there. From the point of view of the museum, it was photographers were scarcely landed gentry any more than they are now. In my then still perennial search for the father figure, opted for Weston, more or less climbed the coconut tree of view camera / his own system stuff. I never had too much stomach for white, thank you, but having done that, I really couldn't very handily find my way down out of that tree. I didn't really like the work that I thought was my best work. I liked the stuff that I didn't like a lot more. There I was, essentially having fallen among sculptors and painters in New York, and among sculptors and painters who were my direct peers, and in a couple of cases at least school chums, Carl Andre and Frank Stella in particular, who were, in the nature of the thing, dogmatic anti-illusionists. And I found myself in the very peculiar and uncomfortable situation of being a committed illusionist. And of course they had reason on their side, you see. I mean, they could marshal not only their own arguments, which were excellent, but those of the Venerable Clement Greenberg and so forth. It left one very little room even for being a devil's advocate. Because if anything, I felt myself not to be the advocate, but the devil himself. Eventually, what I found in making still photographs was that I was working not only in series or in sequences, but was imagining sequences of photographs that were time regulated. Now that's impossible to enforce. You have things up on a wall and you would like to say someone now go back to photograph number 13 and look at it for 8 seconds, all right? Well, at that point, within the work I was doing, the vehicle more or less collapsed, and I was tossed out of it into film, whether I wanted to or not. Then there was some problem in my mind about trying to purge my own work, or at least the internal geometry of my frame of the still photograph. That process is still going on in Zorn's Lemma. I am in point of gratitude to quite a number of people who first hacked their way through the jungles of independent film. And if there had not been the encouragement by example of quite a few people who had somehow managed to make films.
Would you care to mention them?
Sure, of course. Glad to. First and foremost, Stan Brakhage, without question. They didn't have to be films that I agreed with, you understand. But it was nevertheless work of the first interest, made with integrity and conviction. And it had been done, and I'm sure that Brakhage would not agree with the phrase, by a classic gesture of seizing the means of production. But others as well, less prolific than Brakhage, very clearly. Greer, Kenneth Anger, I suppose, who had certainly persevered against extraordinary odds. Most of all, perhaps, in maintaining a space in which it was possible to entertain the notion of making film independently, Jonas Mekas. I knew none of those people at that time. I went to their screenings and so forth. There was then something called the Cinematheque in New York, which became a kind of hangout. I met other people who were trying to make films. Joyce Whelan, Michael Snow, Ken Jacobs, Ernie Gare after a while, although he was somewhat younger. Later on, Paul Sherritts, who was at that time living in Baltimore. And there existed at least for a time, and that time lasted for some years, in New York City, a kind of constant contact among us. One might almost venture to call it a sense of being united in some way, probably by the conviction that there should be good films, preferably films so good that they hadn't been made yet, that the intellectual space open to film had not entirely been preempted. There had to be some films worth making or interesting to make that had not been made, even by the master of Rollinsville or what have you. So that there was in that a kind of encouragement that there was a dialogue, in a word, all right? There was a dialogue which had not existed in still photography. The issue never was, in my case, whether to make or not to make narrative films. I really, I contend. I mean, this is simply, of course, the voice of the author, another imperfect reader. That all my work, and that includes Magellan, includes even the portions of Magellan that have been made and released, are perverse or oblique narratives. I mean, it's possible, after all, to have a narrative account of a very brief period of time, for instance, all right? And to expand that brief period of time until it's unrecognizable, and to fragment it, and to rearrange it, and so forth. Nevertheless, I think it's possible always, if it seems relevant to do so, to expend that kind of diligence and so forth, to retrieve the standard of the rational narrative which accounts for it in some way or other. Just as to take an example that is by no means extreme, let me turn the tables and ask you if you believe, for instance, that Last Year at Marienbad is a narrative film. Well, it is, of course. Project for a Revolution in New York is a narrative book. Okay, it is a narrative fiction. In the case of both of them, one is directed constantly towards an effort to retrieve how to put it, the uninflected account of the events as they actually were, whatever they were, because one perceives immediately that they're highly inflected. And the process of part of the process of seeing that René film with its scenario by Robbe-Grillet, or reading that novel of Robbe-Grillet, is a process of trying to retrieve the actual events, whatever they were, all right? Then they may turn out to not be very interesting. I don't think that film and photography are two halves of something. My general my sensation now, right now, is that they are both parts of something for which we do not have a name at the present time. It would be amusing to try to give it a name. Which thing, once it is fully constituted, will, I expect, finally constitute a kind of counter-machine for the machine of language. That is to say, I think that, or I suspect that the intellect of the West, at least, has been struggling for quite some time to invent a natural counterbalance for language as a way of accounting for the world. a way of doing it through images. I think it's very clear, for lots of reasons, I could give a few, that in the sense that we have had them since the 1830s and the 1890s respectively, both still photography and film are obsolete and are going to vanish. People, I suppose, still think of computers as being enormous IBM mainframes in rooms blazing with fluorescent lights and full of roaring cabinets. But in fact, that's not true. They're little and cheap. I would say it's fair to say that within 2 years, we will have intelligent toasters, for instance, that will always brown your toast to exactly the way you want it, you understand, because the giant computer of 20 years ago is now a little integrated circuit. It's a little chip about it looks kind of like a porcelain Band-Aid and costs about $9. So if you want a really smart toaster, let alone a wearing blender, you understand, or an intelligent frying pan that will flip the omelet at exactly the right time, you're going to have it. And in fact, of course, probably it's going to be difficult to have anything else quite soon. And I suspect that that is going to have consequences, social consequences, and consequences with regard to the fate of the counter machine of language, the image machine. At least as far-reaching as video has, as television, broadcast television has, and probably more so eventually.